this is Stephanie, and this is Talk Tales and Trivia, the show where I talk about enlightening topics on culture, society, pop culture, also with a smidgen of trivia. I am a mad researcher when it comes to research, and I love to give all that information to you so that you can stump your family and friends. It is so much fun. On today's episode, I want to talk about something that's really important and something that maybe perhaps you didn't know about. I have a lot of information about the 2020 census that is on a deadline of September 30th. So get those census forms in, call the Census Bureau, or get the census online and fill it out by September 30th. But now, right now, you can sit back and relax and enjoy this episode on the 2020 census. Okay, so let me start out by saying that the census is required by the Constitution, which calls for an actual enumeration once a decade. An enumeration is the actual count, one by one, of the individuals in the United States. Well, the first census after the American Revolution was taken in 1790 under Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. But on the NPR website, it states that the federal government is trying to get every U.S. household to answer some personal questions, and they are kind of personal for the 2020 census. It's part of a once-a-decade tradition of counting every person living in the United States. The 2020 population number will shape how political power and federal tax dollars are shared in the U.S. over the next 10 years. 10 years, think about that. The data collected by the census determines the number of seats each state has in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it is used to distribute billions in federal funds to local communities. The more populated your state is, the more representatives you'll have in the U.S. House of Representatives. So that is really important that you understand that and fill out the 2020 census, because it does help your state locally and overall. In April, the 2020 census started mailing out forms to all U.S. citizens in the hopes of finding out how best to spend federal and state money. Well, the 2020 census is the first in the United States since the rise of social media and the first U.S. count that's primarily online. Yes, for the first time, Americans can answer census questions over the phone and on the internet, as well as mailing in the form. But this is showing concern around the digital security and participation among communities that may not have easy access to the internet or computers, such as the homeless population and those living in shelters. And for months, the government has been preparing to combat disinformation campaigns that may try to disrupt the count, which rolled out not only in the middle of a presidential race, that's right, a political year, but also during the coronavirus pandemic. On March 20th, the Bureau announced it is extending the end of counting for the census from July 31st to August 14th, and now from August 14th until September 30th. So you have until September 30th to get those census questions answered. Well, officials, however, say that the sooner households fill out a form on their own, the fewer door knockers, or as they are called, census takers, the Census Bureau will have to try to send out. The demographic data are used by businesses to determine, for example, where to build new supermarkets and other needed structures, and business establishments such as daycare, and even the need for school lunch programs and other daily essentials. Also, the results will show where communities need new schools, new clinics, new roads, and more services for families, older adults, and children. The data will also inform the government how hundreds of billions of dollars in federal funding are allocated to more than 100 programs, including Medicaid, Head Start for community mental health services, and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP. It also may contribute to what kind of retail stores will do well in these areas that you live in, how much tax money per town or county can be distributed to the Department of Transportation, how many cars are in a particular area, which may determine the price of gas for that area. Data are also presented on highway mileage and finances, motor vehicle travel, accidents and registrations, and characteristics of public transit, railroads, and pipelines. So the census has everything to do with everything as it relates to you. The Census Bureau includes every person living in the United States, regardless of citizenship or immigration status. But did you know that the residents are counted at the address where they usually live or sleep? So if you have, say for example, a vacation home, the Bureau wants to know about you and the main household you reside in. The Census Bureau also has a detailed breakdown of how the 2020 census will count for deployed troops, college students, incarcerated people, and those displaced by natural disasters. They cover everything. The census asks questions of people in homes and group living situations, including how many people live or stay in each home, whether you rent or own it, and the sex, the age, and the race of each person. And guess what? There's good news. All the states are hitting a high percentage for data responses, with all the states being above 90%. And that's a good thing. But as a whole, the data seems pretty high across the U.S. This also includes census takers, or aka door knockers, who come to houses for those that were non-responders to the mail-in census forms. Those that do not answer the census questions before the cutoff date, which is September 30th, I said, will get a knock on the door, like I did. Quick story here. I was filling out the form, and I had received it once before, so I was filling out the second form that I had received, and all of a sudden I got a knocker on my door. That's right, the door knocker, or the census taker, came to my door while I was filling out the mail-in form, and that is interesting. So that is something you definitely want to avoid. You have to answer a number of questions right then and there. It is advised to not wait for that census taker to come knocking on your door because it's inconvenient, right? They usually come right around dinner time, as they did with me, and it takes about 30 minutes at least. By the way, these questions are the same questions that are asked on the mail-in form, but it does seem to go on and on and on because you have to spell your name. You have to make sure that everything is right, and you have to make sure the census taker gets it down like it was meant to be taken down. Census workers are expected to make home visits also to remote areas, including some places in Alaska, parts of the northern Maine area, and some American Indian reservations. By census law, refusal to answer all or part of the census carries, okay, are you ready? A $100 fine. The penalty goes up to $500 for giving false answers. No false answers, okay? In 1976, Congress eliminated both the possibility of a 60-day prison sentence for noncompliance and a 1-year prison term for false answers. So, take a moment and fill out the census. And if you, like some Americans, feel it's an imposition or not necessary, you will be happy to note that the United States is not the only country with a census. In an article titled Census Around the World, it states that every country in the Western world has a census of the population in that country. But different countries conduct censuses in different ways, in accordance with the size and social behavior of their populations. In most countries, population censuses are conducted once every 10 years, just like ours, but in some countries, such as Japan, Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, and Canada, censuses are conducted more often, like every 5 years, and the information collected ultimately relates to similar issues. And in other countries, it is possible to conduct international comparisons afterwards, which is so cool because you have a lot of international travelers going from country to country. Well, topics of research vary from one country to the next. In accordance with the needs of different countries, The topics investigated in a given country aim to enable efficient planning of activities in that country's national institutions, right? The topics of research aim to enhance understanding of the behavior of different population groups, deriving from the nature of the population, the history of the country, and its specific socioeconomic situation, which I find really, really fascinating. So overall, this information is great for the international traveler, whether it be how many cars there are in a locality, hotels, the people, the restaurants are in a location that is visited most often. It's pretty much has everything to do with everything. Well, on the Museum of New York City website, there's this. The census dictates the questions we ask of ourselves, how we represent ourselves in the world, the ways in which we are categorized, and what goes missing or unstated in the process. But I must tell you, there is also mistrust of government motives among vulnerable populations that create problems, including immigrant communities and the homeless. Well, the mistrust problem was exacerbated recently when a citizen question was proposed to the 2020 census. It was, although later abandoned due to legal challenges, right? Well, dozens of critical social services, education, and infrastructure programs depend on census-guided federal grants that provide almost $6 billion in funding for a city like New York. Well, participation in the census, therefore, has real fiscal consequences. The census itself has changed over time, though. The questions it asks, the form it takes, and the way its data is collected and compiled is definitely changed since 1790 when it was first at its inception. Each of these factors has affected the information that is available and what the numbers tell us about who we are. They encourage us to consider the questions we ask of ourselves, how we represent ourselves in the world, the ways in which we are categorized, and what goes missing or unstated in the process. So stand up and be counted. It is your very own personal responsibility. I talked about personal responsibility on my second podcast, Growing Uncomfortable. If you haven't been counted in the 2020 census, do it before September 30th. Listen, I have a lot of articles and things that I want to share with you. They will all be in the show notes about the 2020 census. Listen, if you've enjoyed this episode of Talk Tales and Trivia, I am so happy. Go to talktalesandtrivia.com to listen to past episodes, this episode, and if you want to share it, please do, and future episodes. You can also go to my social media links, and there's a little bio on me if you are wondering what I'm all about. They're on talktalesandtrivia.com. And also, let me just tell you, if you've enjoyed Talk Tales and Trivia, I just know that you may enjoy Growing Uncomfortable. You can go to growinguncomfortable.com to listen to past, future, and also present episodes. And that is such a cool thing. An episode just went out on individual responsibility in the social media age. So I don't want you to miss that. Listen, before I leave you, I want to tell you a little something, and it's a secret. So don't share it. Just kidding. Please share it. You can subscribe to Talk Tales and Trivia and Growing Uncomfortable. It is free. It just gives you the notifications of when the next episode of Talk Tales and Trivia and Growing Uncomfortable come out. And it tells me how many people are listening. You can email me at talktalesandtrivia@gmail.com and growinguncomfortable@gmail.com with topics, suggestions, or just to say hello. I love that, and I respond quickly. Listen, do the census, do the right thing, do the responsible thing, and be counted, because that will help everybody. It'll help you, your neighbor, your local community, your county, your state, and it'll help everybody in the United States. Okay, listen, I got to get out of here, but I'll see you next time on Talk Tales and Trivia. Okay, bye-bye.